The wind cut through the plains like a dozen knives. Snow whipped across the endless expanse of prairie, blurring the horizon into a single, unforgiving white. Trees, sparse and skeletal, bowed under the weight of frozen ice, their bare branches groaning in protest. Every so often, a lone hawk circled above, fighting the gusts but making little progress against the storm. Clara stumbled through the snow, her tiny boots sinking into drifts that threatened to swallow her whole. Her cheeks were red and raw, and her fingers, tucked desperately inside the tattered gloves she had clutched from some long-forgotten trunk, felt like blocks of ice. She shivered violently, but more from fear than cold. Around her, the world was empty. No cattle, no homestead, no sign of the wagon she had been traveling with earlier, just the endless, merciless wind and the relentless snow. Her small frame moved forward, step by hesitant step. She didn't remember exactly how she had gotten separated. One moment she had been following the wagon team, the next she'd slipped behind in the storm's blinding fury. Panic had clawed at her throat, but she had to keep moving. To stop meant to freeze, and Clara already felt her strength slipping away. She paused, crouching down to catch her breath, but the wind struck her face like a whip. Snow stung her eyes, and she buried her face in her coat, trying to block it out. A distant howl echoed across the plains. Wolves or coyotes, she couldn't tell. Her imagination made them sound larger, fiercer, hungrier. She pressed on, stumbling through the knee-deep drifts, praying for a miracle. The sky was a sheet of gray, clouds low and heavy. The storm didn't just block vision, it seemed to suck away warmth, hope, and sound. Clara's teeth chattered uncontrollably. She hugged herself tighter, her arms trembling beneath her coat. Somewhere ahead, she thought she saw the shadow of a building, a speck of something that could be salvation. She ran toward it, heart pounding, legs heavy, snow pulling at every step. Hours or maybe minutes passed. Time had no meaning in the storm. Her legs ached, her lungs burned, and every movement was agony. She slipped, fell, and scraped her knees on hidden rocks beneath the snow. The wind laughed at her, tossing her hair across her face and into her frozen eyes. But still, she struggled onward. Somewhere in her heart, a stubborn spark refused to die. Then, faint through the blizzard, she heard a sound that didn't belong to the storm, the rhythmic pounding of hooves. Clara froze, her chest tight, eyes wide. Could it be? She dug deeper, forcing herself to stay upright, peering through the white veil. The sound grew closer, steady and sure, like the heartbeat of a living thing in the frozen emptiness. From the swirling snow emerged a figure on horseback, broad shoulders, a wide-brimmed hat, and a coat flapping in the wind. The horse's hooves kicked up clouds of snow with each step. Clara's lips trembled. She waved weakly, and the rider slowed, squinting through the storm. He spotted her. He guided the horse closer, his eyes scanning her frail form, his expression unreadable under the shadow of his hat. "Little girl," the man called over the roar of the wind. His voice was deep and steady, a rare warmth in the cold void. "Hold on now, don't move." Clara's knees buckled. The snow was winning, her vision blurred. Just as she began to collapse, the rider dismounted in one fluid motion, trudging through the drifts with boots that crunched through the ice. He reached her, bending over with broad hands that seemed almost impossibly strong. "Gotcha," he murmured. "You're safe now, don't fight it." He wrapped his coat around her shivering body, a fortress of warmth in the white wasteland. Clara felt the freezing wind recede, the world narrowing to the safety of his presence. She clung to him, sobbing quietly, every ounce of exhaustion and terror pouring out. The rider adjusted her beneath his coat, keeping her close to his chest. The snow still fell, thick and unrelenting, but Clara no longer felt alone. A lifeline had appeared, a figure as solid and reliable as the earth beneath the ice. For the first time that day, she dared to believe she might survive the storm. And somewhere, beyond the endless white, the prairie waited cold, wild, and unforgiving, but no longer quite as lonely. The storm hadn't let up by morning. Snow still blanketed the prairie in a thick, unbroken layer, and the wind, though diminished, still cut like a razor through the rancher's coat. His horse, a sturdy chestnut mare with a coat dusted in frost, plodded steadily through the drifts, each hoofprint disappearing almost as soon as it was made. He had been riding since before dawn, tracing the outskirts of his property, checking fences and the scattered herds that braved the winter plains. The storm had left the land silent except for the occasional snapping of ice-laden branches. Rider McCallahan was a man built of the land. He worked lean and weathered by wind, sun, and decades of frontier living. His hands, calloused and scarred, gripped the reins with the ease of someone who had spent a lifetime taming both horse and land. His hat was pulled low, shadowing a face lined with experience. But his eyes sharp blue, and always watchful, missed nothing. And that morning, they caught movement far across the frozen expanse. A tiny figure, barely visible, shivering in the storm's aftermath. Mick Callahan's horse hesitated, sensing his rider's tension. He nudged the mare forward, eyes fixed on the small, struggling figure. It was a childer girl, perhaps no older than 10. She stumbled, fell, and lay there for a heartbeat, motionless. Mick Callahan's chest tightened. He didn't know who she was or where she had come from, but he knew the prairie could be merciless, and children had no business alone in a blizzard. He spurred the mare into a trot, then a gallop. The sound of hooves hammering against frozen earth drowned only by the moaning wind. Snow flew in all directions, coating him in white, but he ignored it. All that mattered was reaching her. "Hold on, little one," he shouted over the roar of the wind. His voice carried, deep and steady, cutting through the storm. "I've got you." The girl stirred at the sound, her head lifting weakly, eyes wide with fear and disbelief. Mick Callahan didn't hesitate. He swung himself off the mare and ran through the knee-deep snow, boots crunching and sinking with every step. He could see her trembling violently, her tiny form bent against the cold, wrapped in nothing more than a thin, worn coat. Hypothermia was a cruel thief. He had seen it take men, and it could just as easily take her. When he reached her, he knelt low and took her icy hands in his own. They were numb to the touch. "You're going to be all right," he said, voice firm, yet gentle. He removed his own thick coat and draped it over her frail shoulders, wrapping her in warmth like a protective blanket. The girl leaned into him, shivering violently, but something in the safety of his presence calmed her racing heart. Who are you?" she whispered, voice trembling. "Name's Ryder Mick Callahan," he replied. "I run the Mick Callahan ranch just over yonder. You're safe now. That's what matters." She tried to speak, but the words froze in her throat. Her lips were blue, and her shivers made her teeth chatter. Ryder lifted her gently, cradling her against his chest, and began the slow trek back to the ranch. Every step was a battle against the snow, each gust of wind threatening to knock them both down, but Mick Callahan was tireless. He had grown up with the prairie's harsh lessons. Survival demanded grit, determination, and respect for the land as they moved. The rancher kept talking, not just to reassure her but to keep both of them alert. "Snow like this can blind you quick. 1 minute, you're walking clear. Next, you can't see your hand in front of your face. But we'll get you out of it. You'll see." The girl's eyes followed him, wide with wonder. She had never met anyone like him, a man who seemed carved from the very land itself, strong, unflinching, and utterly dependable. For the first time since the storm began, she allowed herself a spark of hope. Finally, after what felt like an eternity through the blinding white, the outline of the ranch came into view. The cabin smoke curled lazily into the gray sky, a beacon of warmth and safety. Ryder quickened his pace, the girl clinging tighter as she felt the first hint of heat against her frozen limbs. "Almost there," he said, voice rough but kind. "Just a little further, and you'll be inside, safe and warm." The porch of the cabin emerged from the snow like an oasis, and Ryder eased the girl to the wooden steps. He fumbled with the latch of the door, cold stiffening his fingers, but finally swung it open. Warm air washed over them, carrying the scent of burning wood and smoked meats. The girl gasped, blinking rapidly, overwhelmed by heat, light, and safety. Inside, Ryder set her down gently by the hearth. The fire crackled, sending ribbons of warmth across the room. He removed the snowy coat and offered her a mug of warm milk, careful not to scald her, as she shivered uncontrollably. "You're safe now," he repeated, kneeling to meet her gaze. "Nobody's going to leave you out there again." The girl nodded faintly, still trembling, but for the first time since the blizzard began, she believed him. Somewhere beyond the walls of the cabin, the prairie waited wild, cold, and unforgiving, but inside, for this moment, there was only warmth, safety, and the steady presence of a man who had appeared just in time. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting long, flickering shadows across the rough-hewn walls of the Mick Callahan cabin. The smell of burning wood mixed with the faint scent of pine and iron from the ranch outside. Clara sat on a thick woven blanket Ryder had spread across the floor, knees drawn to her chest, still trembling from the storm's relentless bite. The snow clung stubbornly to her hair and coat, frost still etching tiny crystals on her eyelashes. She felt utterly small in the vast warmth of the cabin, yet somehow, it was the first place she had felt safe in hours, maybe days. Ryder knelt beside her, rubbing her hands in his own massive, calloused ones. "Drink this," he said, passing her a tin mug of warm milk. "Helps with the chill. Take it slow." Clara's hands were stiff and numb, but the warmth from the mug seeped into her fingers, sending shivers of relief through her body. She sipped cautiously, afraid it would burn, but the heat melted through her slowly, working its way into her frozen limbs. "You're lucky, little lady," Ryder said, his voice low, gravelly, and oddly comforting. "Storms like that, they don't care who you are. Could have been the end out there." He glanced at the window where the blizzard had finally begun to ease. The wind howling less aggressively, snow swirling lazily instead of violently. "But I saw you, and I'm glad I did." Clara wanted to speak, but the words were trapped behind lips stiff with cold. She simply nodded, eyes wide, taking in the tall, rugged man who had appeared out of the snow like some guardian from the prairie itself. Ryder's wide-brimmed hat, dusted with frost, shadowed a face marked with years of sun, wind, and hard work, yet his eyes held a rare softness, one that made her believe he meant every word. "Let's get those clothes off," he continued, helping her remove the wet, tattered coat she had worn through the storm. The fabric was frozen stiff, sticking to her shivering form. He replaced it with a thick woolen coat of his own, the smell of saddle leather and smoke clinging to it. "Better, huh?" he asked. She nodded again, grateful beyond words. Ryder moved to the hearth and added another log to the fire, sending sparks flying toward the ceiling. He studied her carefully, checking for injuries beyond the obvious cold and frostbite risk. "You're going to be stiff for a while, but nothing's broken. Thank the Lord." He shook his head with relief. "That storm, it could have been a cruel way to meet your end." Clara's lips trembled. I was alone," she whispered. "I got lost. I don't know where my folks went." Her voice cracked, and she buried her face in her hands. The room was quiet except for the fire and the faint whistling of wind outside. Ryder didn't speak immediately, simply letting her grief flow, a patient presence that made the cabin feel safer than it ever had before. After a long pause, Ryder knelt closer, resting a large, warm hand on her shoulder. "You're safe now. No one's leaving you out in that snow again. Not while I've gotta say." His tone was firm but kind, a steady anchor in the storm of her emotions. Clara looked up, tears streaking her frozen cheeks, and for the first time since she had been left behind, she allowed herself to trust him. "I'm Clara," she said finally, voice barely audible. I was so scared." "Clara," he repeated softly, as if tasting the name and committing it to memory. "You don't have to be scared anymore. Not tonight. You're inside, warm, and fed. That's what matters." He handed her another blanket, tucking her in with care, like a parent tending a child. Hours passed, and slowly the color returned to her pale cheeks. She sipped more milk, warmed herself by the fire, and watched Ryder move around the cabin, preparing a small meal of stew and bread. Every motion he made spoke of years spent working the land, measured, deliberate, and efficient. Clara felt a strange awe. This man had survived winters worse than she could imagine, storms that would have crushed anyone else. Yet he had risked himself to save her. As the meal cooked, Ryder settled in across from her, leaning back against the wall. "I know a storm like this can make a person feel small, helpless, but you've got a fire in you. You made it this far, didn't you?" Clara nodded, clutching her blanket tighter. "That fire, that stubbornness see you through more than one storm in your life. Remember that?" Outside, the wind began to die down, leaving a hushed silence that felt almost sacred. Inside, the cabin radiated warmth, safety, and something Clara hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. She realized she wasn't just alive because of luck. She was alive because someone had cared enough to risk themselves for a stranger. And in the quiet moments, as she watched Ryder tend the fire, she knew without a doubt that the world, harsh as it could be, still had people willing to step into the storm. For the first time since she had been left in the snow, Clara let herself believe she might survive, not just the blizzard, but whatever lay ahead in the wild, unpredictable West. The snow had begun to settle, thick and heavy over the prairie, but inside the McCallahan cabin, the chill of the blizzard had been replaced with a cozy warmth that seemed to embrace every corner. Clara sat cross-legged near the fire, wrapped in one of Ryder's thick wool blankets, her cheeks pinking as the heat returned to her frozen skin. The small cabin smelled of wood smoke and the faint tang of cured meats, a scent so ordinary yet comforting that Clara felt herself finally exhale for the first time since she had been lost in the snow. Ryder moved around the cabin with the ease of a man who had spent years making a home in the wilderness. He set a pot of stew over the fire, the aroma of simmering vegetables and beef curling into the room. Every movement of his was purposeful, precise, a reflection of decades spent living by the land. Clara watched quietly, fascinated, as he chopped vegetables on a worn wooden board, the knife striking rhythmically against the surface with a sound that seemed almost musical amidst the crackle of the fire. "You'll need to eat something," Ryder said, his voice gentle but firm. "Snow drains the body faster than anything else. And if you don't keep your strength up, the prairie will remind you why it's unforgiving." He ladled the stew into a bowl, placing it carefully in front of her. Clara sniffed cautiously, the warm steam rising to her face, and then took a small spoonful. The flavor was simple but nourishing, and she found herself eating faster than she expected. While she ate, Ryder pulled up a chair opposite her and began talking, not just to fill the silence but to teach her, in small ways, about life in the West. "You see, Clara, out here, the land takes what it wants if you're not careful. Snow, storms, wolves, they're part of living where the horizon never ends. You've got to respect it, or it'll bite you where you least expect." He chuckled softly. "Lucky for you, you ran into someone who's had his fair share of bites and survived." Clara listened intently, absorbing his words as if they were stories from another world. She had never known life like this, harsh, demanding, yet honest and raw in a way the cities or towns she'd known could never be. She watched him tend the fire, stir the stew, and move with a quiet confidence that came from knowing the land like the back of one's hand. After the meal, Ryder handed her a thick wool coat of her own and helped her lace up sturdy boots. "Can't go wandering barefoot in the snow?" he said with a grin. "We'll be heading outside tomorrow to check the fences, see that the herd's accounted for. You'll see what it's like to live out here." Clara nodded, her curiosity growing despite her lingering fear. She wanted to know more about this man and his way of life, this life that seemed so foreign yet oddly inviting. As night fell, the wind outside moaned through the eaves, rattling the windows. Ryder brought a tin of hot water and a damp cloth to help clean the frost from her hair and face. "Better get comfortable," he said. "The prairie's quiet tonight, but the mornings can bite." He smiled faintly, a rare softness breaking through his rugged exterior. Clara allowed herself to relax under his care, feeling the last of the day's tension drain from her body. Once she was cleaned up and tucked in by the fire, Ryder moved to a corner of the cabin, where a small bedroll and a pile of blankets were arranged neatly. He settled in, keeping one eye on Clara as she drifted toward sleep, the firelight dancing across her tired face. The storm had passed, but the experience left a lingering awe of the land, the wind, and the sheer unpredictability of the West before sleep overtook her. Clara whispered, "Thank you, Mr. McCallahan." Ryder's deep voice rumbled in reply, "Don't thank me yet, you've got a long way to go, but I reckon you've got the spirit to make it. You survived the blizzard. That says a lot about you, kid." And as Clara drifted into a deep, peaceful sleep, the cabin hummed with warmth and safety. A stark contrast to the ruthless winter storm outside. The prairie stretched endlessly beyond those walls, wild and untamed, but inside, for the first time since she had been lost, she felt a sense of belonging. However fragile, she was no longer just a girl caught in a storm. She was a part of something larger, a rugged, honest, unforgiving world that had its own rules. And now, she had a guide to help her navigate it. Outside, snow drifted silently across the plains, covering hoofprints and footprints alike. But inside, the fire burned bright, casting long, comforting shadows across the cabin's walls. It was a small sanctuary in a vast, unpredictable world, and for Clara, it was the beginning of something new, something she had never imagined she could survive, let alone embrace. The prairie was deceptively quiet the next morning. The snow lay thick across the rolling hills, sparkling under a pale sun, but Ryder knew better than to trust the silence. Winters out west were never truly calm. Wolves, desperate for food, prowled the edges of ranches, and human threats or rustlers, outlaws, or worse could strike when least expected. He saddled his mare while Clara watched from the cabin door, still bundled in his spare coat, the woolen fabric nearly swallowing her small frame. "Today," Ryder said, tightening the straps of his saddle, "we check the fences, make sure the herd's safe, and keep an eye out for anything unusual." His tone was matter-of-fact, but Clara could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand hovered near the butt of his revolver. This was no ordinary ride. The West demanded constant vigilance. Clara mounted the mare with help, gripping the reins tightly as Ryder led them into the expanse of white. The wind bit at their faces, cold and insistent, but the sun reflected off the snow, blinding and dazzling. Every ridge, every shadow, could hide danger. She learned quickly to trust Ryder's instincts, noticing how his eyes scanned the horizon, catching subtle signs that she wouldn't have noticed: broken twigs, tracks in the snow, the way the trees swayed in a certain rhythm. Hours passed as they moved from fence line to fence line. Ryder worked with practiced efficiency, inspecting posts, mending broken rails, and coaxing frightened cattle back into place. Clara tried to help, fetching tools and holding pieces of wood. But even the simplest tasks were laborious in the knee-deep snow. Yet she found a strange satisfaction in the work, feeling useful and part of the rhythm of ranch life. Just as they approached the northern edge of the property, Ryder halted suddenly, hand raised. Clara froze in the stirrups. Ahead, among the snow-laden trees, dark shapes moved with an unnatural stealth. Wolves, at least 3, maybe more, their eyes glinting and teeth bare, circling a small calf separated from the herd. Ryder dismounted smoothly, whispering for Clara to stay back. "Stay on the horse. Don't spook her," he instructed. He crept closer, eyes fixed on the predators. His revolver was drawn, but he hesitated. Killing wolves was necessary, yes, but they often worked in packs, and their cunning made every move unpredictable. The wolves lunged suddenly, the calf bleating in terror. Ryder fired a shot into the air, the sharp crack echoing across the snow-covered hills. The largest wolf hesitated, ears flat against its head, but the others advanced. Ryder's second shot struck a near miss, kicking snow into the air as the wolf spun away. He moved with precision, forcing the pack back toward the edge of the tree line, corralling them like a cowboy herding cattle in reverse. Clara's heart pounded. She had never seen danger so close, so raw. She gripped the reins, instinctively leaning forward to follow Ryder's movements. Her fear was a tangible thing, but so was a new sense of determination. She wanted to help, even if all she could do was stay calm and obey his instructions. Finally, the wolves retreated, melting into the forest with snarls and huffs. The calf huddled near Ryder's mare, shaking but unharmed. He patted its head, then looked at Clara with a mix of relief and pride. "Not bad for your first brush with prairie danger, kid," he said, voice calm but tinged with adrenaline. "You kept your cool. That's half the battle out here." Clara exhaled shakily, realizing how close she had come to witnessing tragedy. The lesson was clear. The West could be beautiful, vast, and inviting, but it could also turn deadly in a heartbeat. She glanced at Ryder, seeing not just a savior from the blizzard, but a man whose life was lived in constant negotiation with danger. Someone who carried both courage and wisdom like the reins he held. They returned to the ranch in silence, the adrenaline fading into exhaustion. The cabin's warmth greeted them like an embrace, and Clara felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for its safety and for Ryder, who had guided her through yet another brush with the harsh, untamed land. As night fell and the fire roared back to life, Clara understood more than ever that surviving the West meant more than just enduring storms. It required courage, vigilance, and the ability to trust those who had mastered the land. And as she lay by the fire that night, the distant howls of wolves reminding her that the prairie never truly slept, she felt herself growing stronger, more alert, and ever more aware of the life that awaited beyond the cabin walls. The snowstorm had passed, yes, but the lessons of the West were only beginning. The morning sun peeked over the snow-capped horizon, casting a golden glow across the endless prairie. Clara shivered slightly, not from cold, but from a mixture of anticipation and nervous energy. Today, Ryder had promised, she would learn more than just survival. She would learn the rhythms of ranch life. The chores were no longer abstract. They were essential. Each task had meaning, and Ryder insisted that she understand that meaning before her hands ever touched a rope or a post. Ryder led her out to the corral, where a dozen horses stamped impatiently, their breath puffing white into the cold air. "These animals, they respect strength and patience, kid," he said, eyes sweeping over the restless herd. "If you can't be firm and fair, you won't get far. Horses are smarter than most folks give them credit for." Clara's first task was simple in theory, but intimidating in practice, grooming one of the smaller mares. Her hands, still stiff from the cold, fumbled with the brush, and the horse snorted impatiently. Ryder watched silently, offering guidance only when necessary. "Slow strokes, Clara, let her feel your rhythm. Horses know fear and hesitation faster than a man can draw a gun." Hours passed in this quiet, almost meditative work. Gradually, Clara felt the tension in her shoulders ease. She learned to read the mare's tiny gestures, a flick of the ears, a shift of weight, the soft nicker that signaled comfort. By the end of the morning, the mare's coat gleamed under her care, and the animal seemed to regard Clara with cautious approval. Ryder's approving nod made her chest swell with a sense of accomplishment she hadn't known she could feel. Next came roping practice. The snow made footing treacherous, and Clara stumbled several times, landing hard in the powder. "Not bad," Ryder said, helping her to her feet each time. Out here, you learn to get back up fast. Pride's fine, but survival demands persistence. He demonstrated the correct swing, his arm carving perfect circles through the crisp air. Clara mimicked him, feeling the rope arc above her head, then land in a clumsy loop around a fence post. Almost, he exclaimed, his grin wide beneath his weathered hat. You're getting it? By midday, Clara's hands were raw, her muscles aching, yet she felt invigorated. She had survived the storm, the wolves, and now the relentless work of the ranch. But the true lesson came not from the physical labor, came from Ryder himself. He had shown her patience, resilience, and quiet guidance, never forcing her, but allowing her to learn at her own pace. During a brief rest by the corral, Ryder handed Clara a tin cup of hot coffee, thick with cream. You're doing good, kid, he said, eyes soft. Most would have quit after a few hours, or worse, after the wolves. But you're stubborn. And stubbornness is a good thing out here. It keeps folks alive. Clara took a sip, warmth flooding through her chest, mingling with pride. She realized that she wasn't just surviving, she was beginning to thrive. The day ended with a ride along the northern boundary of the ranch. Clara had grown more confident, sitting tall in the saddle, reins held firmly yet gently. Ryder rode beside her, offering tips and occasional encouragement. They rode in silence for stretches, letting the snow-muted world around them speak. When they reached a ridge, the wind cut through their coats, and Clara felt the vast expanse of the prairie like never before. The horizon seemed endless, wild, and full of possibilities. You see that, Clara? Ryder asked quietly, pointing to the distant mountains. That's your world now. Big, harsh, but beautiful. And if you can handle it, it'll give back more than you can imagine. She nodded, feeling the weight of his words. The prairie was unforgiving, but it demanded respect and offered freedom in return. And through this shared struggle, Clara felt a bond for ninja trust that went beyond words. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold, Ryder led her back to the cabin. They were silent, but the quiet was comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding. Clara realized that she had begun to see Ryder not just as a protector, but as a mentor, someone whose experience and guidance were shaping her into someone capable of living in this wild, untamed land. That night, as she warmed herself by the fire, Clara felt a rare peace. She had braved the storm, faced wolves, learned the ways of the ranch, and survived. And through it all, Ryder had been there steady, patient, and watchful. She understood now that surviving the West wasn't about fearlessness. It was about learning to trust, to persevere, and to find strength in unexpected places. For the first time since the blizzard, Clara didn't feel like a helpless girl left to the mercy of the prairie. She felt like someone who belonged, someone who had found a place and a person she could rely on. And that, she realized, was a bond far stronger than any storm or danger the West could throw at her. The prairie was quiet that morning, the snow glinting like crushed diamonds under the early sun. Clara stood outside the cabin, taking in the sweeping landscape that had once seemed so unforgiving. Now, it felt alive with possibility. The wind carried a crisp freshness that hinted at change, renewal, and the promise of new beginnings. She tugged Ryder's spare coat tighter around her shoulders, not because of the cold, but because it had become a symbol of safety, resilience, and trust. Ryder approached from the corral, leading a horse that had grown calmer under Clara's gentle guidance. Ready for today? He asked, voice low but steady. Clara nodded, a sense of confidence she hadn't possessed a week ago, filling her chest. Today would mark another step toward independence, and she felt eager rather than afraid. Their morning began with routine chores, feeding the cattle, checking fences, and guiding the herd closer to the stable for the harsher weeks of winter. Clara moved with precision now, her hands skilled at untangling rope, her eyes sharp at noticing weak spots in the fencing. Ryder watched her from time to time, proud but quiet, letting her take the lead when it was safe. By midday, they rode together across the snow-dusted hills, following a winding trail that led toward a hidden stream. Ryder broke the silence first. You've come a long way, Clara, he said, glancing at her. When I found you, you were lost, alone, scared. Now look at you. Strong, observant, you've got the grit it takes to live out here. Clara felt a warmth that wasn't from the sun or the wool coat. I couldn't have done it without you, she admitted. You taught me how to survive, how to think, how to move, how to trust. She hesitated, then added, and I think, I could actually live here, for real. Ryder smiled, a rare softness breaking through his rugged exterior. That's the thing about the West. It teaches you who you are, whether you want it to or not. And you've learned fast. You've got a future out here if you want it. They rode in silence after that, letting the wind carry their thoughts across the plains. The snow sparkled, untouched in places, marking the vast openness that stretched as far as the eye could see. Clara felt the pulse of the land beneath her feet, the rhythm of life and work, danger and beauty, mingling in perfect balance. By the afternoon, they returned to the ranch, and Ryder handed her a set of tools for repairing the barn roof, a task she had once considered impossible. "It's yours to learn now," he said. "I'll guide you, but you've earned the right to take on responsibility. Out here, work's respect. Do well, and people horses, cattle, folks notice." Clara's hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from anticipation. She understood now that the West demanded courage in everyday tasks, not just in facing storms or wolves. As the day faded into evening, Clara sat near the fire inside the cabin, her body tired but her spirit alive. Ryder moved about, tending to supper, yet the silence between them was comfortable, filled with a shared understanding of what they had endured together. The storm, the wolves, the relentless work-all had shaped her, but it was the bond she had formed with Ryder that had anchored her. "Tomorrow," Ryder said finally, breaking the quiet, "we'll ride toward the eastern ridge. You'll see the land stretch beyond what you've ever imagined. And maybe, just maybe, you'll realize this place can be home." Clara looked into the fire, the flames dancing across her face. "I think I already do," she said softly. "Home isn't just a cabin or a roof. It's people, safety, learning how to stand tall, even when the world's trying to knock you down." Ryder nodded, a slow smile forming. "That's right. Out here, you make your own way, but you don't have to do it alone. Remember that." Outside, the prairie lay still beneath the stars, vast and untamed, a reminder of both danger and opportunity. But inside the cabin, warmth and light held sway, marking a sanctuary carved by resilience, trust, and human kindness. Clara realized she had come far from the frightened girl left in the snow. She was strong, capable, and ready for whatever the West might throw at her. The fire crackled and the wind whispered beyond the cabin walls. The storm had passed, but the lessons remained: courage, perseverance, and the bonds formed in hardship could transform even the harshest frontier into a place of hope. And in that quiet cabin, surrounded by the endless prairie and under Ryder's steady watch, Clara felt it her new beginning. The girl who had been left to die in the snow had survived. She had learned, she had grown, and she was ready to live.